Welcome, you guys, to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Salvador Klein with us. He's the author of Strikes Theory, which you probably already guess what it is. It's basically three strikes away from disaster or strokes away from success, which is quite interesting. I love simplicity, and I'm eager to dive into the details of that one. Salvador is founder and co-founder and investor at various businesses, namely Quant Plus, Mosaic Play, Torkin, Life Sherpa, uh, serial entrepreneur. Basically, he's got a whole bunch. Curb, he's an investor there. Routiner, Global RevGen, which he's been running for 15 years now, which is super impressive. So I'm really eager to learn more about the theory here. The podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start or scale podcast, go to podfire.com. Salvador, welcome to the pod. Tell us a bit more about yourself and the three strikes theory.
Thanks, Charles. I appreciate you having me on your podcast. So I came from nothing, right? I grew up in a single parent family on welfare in Canada. So everything I have, I built for myself. And I was, I suppose, in hindsight, uniquely positioned to be an entrepreneur because I've never really had anything to lose. And I was always willing to take risks. And so 15 years ago, like you said, I quit my job and I took a big risk and I started a business which became an advertising agency that has offices in 4 countries around the world and works for half of Australia's universities now. And I'm really proud of that business. And I have not been working in it for 6 years. I handed over to the first employees who took over the show then. So I consider myself a post-exit founder, even though I didn't sell that business. I still own it, but I don't work in it anymore for a long time now. And when that business had downs, I had to remortgage my house a couple times to save it. When I had ups, I was able to personally invest in all of the companies you mentioned that are all on my LinkedIn profile. And just through relationships, I ended up being a really early investor. So it gave me a very unique perspective and window into the journeys of all these different companies in all these different sectors and through different stages. And so I was either an early investor or a co-founder or the first non-founder to join the board, in some cases the chairman of the board. And so I saw these companies start, grow, move. Some of them move from startup into scale up, and then some things go wrong and slide back into startup. And I've developed this theory over the last 24 years in business when I worked in corporates, in scale ups, and then in my own business, and then also in these companies that I've invested into. And what I noticed was something quite simple, which is that any business, large or small, is only ever 3 strikes of bad luck away from disaster, or 3 strokes of good luck away from success. And when I say luck, I don't really mean luck. You have to take a risk to get lucky or unlucky. So when I say luck, I really mean events that are unfortunate or fortunate. And it made me think that as founders, as CEOs, as business leaders, as business people, what are we all trying to do? Well, we're really all trying to put ourselves and our companies in good luck's way. And if you can do that 3 times, you will be in a position to win. But I've also seen that when 3 strikes of bad luck happen, it really puts a company into disaster. And usually I start with the 3 strikes of bad luck because what we want to make sure we do is not to die. We don't want our business to be in disaster. And what I've noticed is that it's not usually the fact that 3 things happen that are unlucky or misfortunate. It's the convergent timing of 2 of those strikes that really have a big impact. And so after realizing this very simple theory, I decided to start sharing it with the world. And so I write a Substack for free for founders, for CEOs, and I write about real world case studies that I have had front row seats to or second row seats to. For example, the first case study was of a startup that was moving into scale up, and they were increasing revenue 5 years in a row. But they were a fintech, and they were regulated. They needed a financial services license, so their compliance costs were very high. It's hard for startups in regulated industries because their cost base is higher than others from day one. So what this company did to kind of mitigate that was they kind of subcontracted their license out and made some revenue from that from day one. So they managed to grow quite a lot without the need for external investor capital, which was good. They were kind of, covering their costs and growing revenue. And then they raised some money, and they spent more money than they had than they made because they were spending investor capital. And everything was looking really good. They moved from startup into scale up, and they kind of corporatized their board a bit. And then the first strike of bad luck happened, which was a black swan event. It was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Very hard for anyone to predict. And of course, the development team for that business was based in Ukraine. So that delayed by about 9 months the launch of a new product line. They had spent 5 years developing a business to consumer offering, but their real growth was going to come from this B2B offering. And they were working with this Ukrainian development team to build that. So that was delayed. And then also it delayed the launch, but also it delayed the learning period where that business could figure out how long it takes to get a lead, convert a lead, make a sale for these B2B sales, which are larger revenue and longer lead times. So it really basically put them back about 1.5 years in terms of their overall revenue journey. That strike in and of itself would not have put them in disaster. It just was a challenge. However, about 6 months after that first strike, the second and third strikes happened at the same time, in the same month. The second strike was decreased revenues because the largest subcontractor on their financial services license left. So they lost a big chunk of their operating revenue, and their compliance costs quadrupled because their revenue kept going up and up and up. So they had decreased revenue and increased costs, both hitting in the same month. Not impossible to predict those, but very hard to predict the convergent timing of them. And when you put that in context of the first strike and where they were on the revenue journey, that really put them into disaster. So I saw that firsthand in that startup to scale up, which then slid back into startup. And they're still around, but it was a very disastrous situation, very challenging. And the second case study on my Substack to prove that this theory applies to companies large and small, the second case study is actually about a multi-billion-dollar listed company. And I thought once, long ago, companies that have lots of money are immune to these kind of bad luck events, but that's not true. So this company was almost $2 billion market cap. They were growing really well and really fast. And they had a $5.50 share price. They bought another company for $60 million. And then they bought a company for $160 million. And everything was looking really good. And then the first strike of bad luck happened. They then released a profit forecast to the market of $87 million net profit after tax, because everything was looking fantastic. And then in the next 2 months after that profit forecast, the first and second strike of bad luck converged, and that triggered the third strike of bad luck. So the first strike was that the company that they first acquired for $60 million, competitive action, which was anti-competitive from their competitors, actually impacted their revenues slightly. And the second strike of bad luck was at the same time, there was something called the Australian Banking Royal Commission going on, which meant that banks stopped foreclosing businesses or reduced it dramatically. And the second company that they acquired for $160 million, their largest profit contributor, was liquidating business assets from foreclosed businesses. So combined, those two strikes that happened at the same time actually forced them to do a profit downgrade from $87 million net profit after tax to $82 million net profit after tax, a very small profit downgrade. But it happened so soon that spooked the share market, and it looked like they didn't really have a handle on their business. And so their share price took a dip. And when their share price took a dip, that triggered the third strike, which was their largest listed competitor moving into a hostile takeover. So then they went into a trading halt, they went into due diligence, but because they were growing so fast and had been buying all these companies, and a range of other reasons, the due diligence process uncovered some inconsistencies, and the takeover fell through. When they came out of the trading halt, their share price tanked to 50 cents. So in a period of about 4 months, this multi-billion-dollar listed company that was on the up and buying companies went from a share price of $5.50 and $2 billion market cap to a share price of 50 cents in only 4 months. And even in hindsight, it's very hard to predict the convergence of those first two strikes. So in both those case studies of the startup and the listed company, when those strikes occurred, the leadership of those companies still felt like they were in a position of strength, when actually their position was quite precarious. And what I'm trying to do in sharing these case studies on my Substack is to give people a window into these events, so that if you have a strike of bad luck in your business, you can project yourself forward and look at today as if you had the power of hindsight.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like the 3 degrees of separation in networking. I mean, if you can conduct studies over it, or over being politically correct with the number 3, that'd be interesting. What were the 3 strikes with FTX?
With FTX. Well, that's an interesting one. And I suspect that the 3 strikes were probably that the founder was unscrupulous, I guess, is an underlying strike. But really, in terms of what happened with that story, it's very closely tied to the story of Binance and the founder of Binance, because the Binance founder invested in FTX, and when FTX was trying to grow, the Binance founder, who had a significant stake, actually blocked some of their growth by not disclosing his personal information to some regulators when they were trying to move into Europe. So it was blocking their growth, and so they were forced to buy the Binance founder out for about $2 billion or something, which really took away all of their cash reserves and a big chunk of the FTC coin. And so that put them in a position of disadvantage. And then the Binance founder then sold his share of the FTC coin at well below market rate on Binance, which devalued the FTC coin everywhere in the world. And that in turn uncovered a big hole in the FTX balance sheet, which was based on the value of the FTC coin. And then the third strike was that Binance itself offered to take over FTX and announced it, and then pulled out of the deal. So those are probably the 3 strikes that really put FTX into ruin as a business, and mainly because of the business dealings with the Binance founder and the actions of Binance, which is, of course, Binance is the biggest and has always been biggest, and FTX was the second biggest and challenger brand. And so that was big business flexing its muscles, and whether it was strategic or incidental, the consequence of that was that it uncovered these deficiencies in FTX and put them out of business.
I'm on your LinkedIn. It seems that you're a strong believer into dismantling tech monopolies. I personally don't think that should be a thing. I think competition should be left by its own. What's your stance on that?
I think the truth of the world is that there's two areas of big tech on planet Earth. There's American big tech and Chinese big tech. There are no true competitors to American big tech that have come out of Europe or Latin America or anywhere in Asia, except for China. China's got a same or better version of all of American big tech, and so the real value in big tech, as we know, is our data, and we are all the data cows that have been feeding, being milked for all of our data and monetized. And so at the moment, there are many antitrust cases in Europe and in North America against all of big tech. That is, they're all based on one thing, which is essentially misuse of market power, monopolistic behavior. And I think that actually is anti-competitive. For example, I'm sure that many of your audience are founders of technology startups. And what does all of big tech have in common? They all buy successful technology scale-ups or businesses and then integrate them into their own offering or just turn them off because they're competitors. And that's a misuse of market power, and that stifles competition because it centralizes the power and control and resources in the hands of only a few companies. And in the world, on planet Earth, in the last 20 years, for example, in real terms, most people are poorer than they were 20 years ago. Most people. And I'm not talking about companies now, I'm talking about people. The middle class in developed economies, their income has gone up 160%, but their cost of living has gone up 164%. So in real terms, most people are poorer than they were 20 years ago, even though the global market has gone up something like 37 times. So we have trillion-dollar big tech companies now, but that is accelerating the centralization of the world's capital and power in the hands of corporations, which in turn is making the rich richer and the middle class and the poor poorer. So it's not just about big tech and about the data that they've taken and misused from everyone. It's also about the consequence of that for market competition for startups all over the world that they buy and dismantle or buy and integrate, which concentrates their innovation and power. And it's also about the money, because it's not a fair or just world if there are only 1% of humans that actually have the majority of the world's resources.
Right. I believe though that there's newcomers like OpenAI that can grasp almost immediate power via Google that and Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft, they invested in OpenAI. That's what saved them, quote unquote. But I think they're full of old farts, right? And even money won't save these companies. I think most of these companies are crumbling. The only thing that's keeping them alive is money, because they don't have what startups have, which is innovation, passion, being lean, moving fast, breaking things. And I don't think corporations are in a nice position right now. Yes, these old fortunes might try to hold their power, just like it's taken a while for petroleum to shift to electricity, but sooner or later they're gonna have to adapt to the new AI age, which is probably one person company and multiple employees, agents, AI agents, that is. And I think that's the scariest thing is like, are humans gonna adapt to this new reality of being their own boss, being a freelancer. I do think with almost 100% certainty that this is going to be the future. Are humans going to stand up to themselves, or are they just going to give up? I'm not worried about startups. I think they already won the battle against like big corporations, and I do think that once we have AI agents, that money is not gonna like hold its moat for some time. What do you think about this?
I definitely agree that big business has outsourced innovation to startups, which is why you see the world's largest companies buying the world's smallest companies, like Microsoft buying OpenAI, for example. I disagree that startups have won any kind of battle against corporates, because corporates have all the money, startups have all the innovation. But again, what corporates do is they buy those startups for competitive advantage. Why did Microsoft buy OpenAI? For competitive advantage. In fact, later today, my Substack article for this week is co-authored with another Substack writer, and he writes about the three strikes that are bringing Google down, while I'm writing about the three strokes that are bringing Microsoft up and that made Microsoft the world's most valuable company. And interestingly, for Google's three strikes, those are happening in close succession, the convergent timing of those misfortunes, essentially, which probably is more down to bad strategy or bad decisions than bad luck for Google. But the ascent of Microsoft, actually, those three strokes of good strategy have occurred across a decade. And so I think that taking a contrarian view, that Microsoft's ascent actually is the result of very good long-term strategy over a decade.
I think they were lucky with the OpenAI incident. It came very, very near. And that's all. I don't think Microsoft's going to survive. I think they gave a poison gift to OpenAI by funding them with that much money. They pretty much killed the genie in the bottle. Although I do think that GPT-5 is going to be incredible. I think it's more companies like Claude's, because once you start developing AI agents, I speak to YC Combinators, YC founders on a daily basis, and these are pretty much the best founders in the world. And they're telling me that they have these 5 agents instead of these 5 employees. So at this point, why do they even need the money? Maybe to spend on platform, sure, but once you have an AI agent doing outreach for you for $1 a day and it's generating a bunch of leads, I mean, you pretty much won the game. And most founders do not like the restraints of capital. I don't think it's going to last for long. I'm not saying money is going to disappear. I think money is one of the greatest invention, and most people are obviously going to use it. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's going to stay that way for at least a century. But I am saying that, yeah, AI startups are taking over. It's not going to require much employees, which is usually 30% of the expenses in a company, if not 40. And at this point, capital might not be needed. And I think that old investors, they don't have their brains anymore. They're just like, yo, I'm going to invest my money and it's going to grow. It's going to flourish. Some of them make it. Most of them don't, because it's venture capital. It's quite risky. But I think that you're going to need to keep on working your ass off and keep competing to stay relevant in this economy, which is also scary for investors. But yeah. Let's see with
I agree.
Microsoft, because it's an interesting thesis. And yeah, Google, even Apple, like Apple, I'm not super impressed. They make amazing products, but it takes them forever to ship. I really think what's maintaining them alive is brand. It's like this synonym of quality and so forth. I think corporations were really like a flash in the pan in the economy's history. And yeah, I don't think it's going to be that way. The future might be more like DAOs, like people uniting their resources together, voting together. And I do think that even like boards, like we've seen in OpenAI, I don't think they make any sense. What are your thoughts on this?
I hope you're right. And
I'm
I've done
willing to
my
bet lots of money on that one, by the way, for anyone listening. Uh, bet against me. Let's see. I'm a good bettor.
I've done my company director's course, and what I learned there really was that new world technology companies and new world companies of all kinds have to retrofit themselves into old world governance structures that were developed in the 1800s. The whole concept of a limited liability company with shareholders was created when Europeans, the Dutch and the English, went over to the East and to facilitate the spice trade, you know, among much else. And we are still today living in um, and operating within and building companies within a regulatory framework that was developed in the 1800s. And it doesn't work. It doesn't really work for startups. It doesn't really work for innovative companies. It doesn't really work in many of the real world scenarios, like you say. And there must be a better way. And that's my great hope for decentralized technology of all kinds and enabling new decision making and new ownership structures that are more dynamic and more flexible, that move with the times. And the challenge, however, is that most of the world's money is owned by only a few of the world's people. And so while a lot of this new age technology can exist on the sidelines, the reality is the people who have the money are the same people who hold the power today. So it's a challenge to change things. I'm not saying we shouldn't try. We should try, absolutely. But what I think everyone should realize really is that the current system is broken, and just how broken the current system is. So the reason for change needs to be clear and demonstrable. And in my mind, it is. But I don't think that for the vast majority of humans on the planet, the real reasons for change are super clear, nor are the answers. So the job of all of us and the founder community is to provide the answers and align those answers to the reasons for change.
I trust so much in founders. I mean, they're rebels, but most of them are good intention. They're self thinkers as well. They can think critically. And yeah, I think that the notion of amassing and keeping power without earning it, I mean, it's just foreign to my founder brain. Might not be to these people. Life must be pretty boring as well. Like when you have everything and your job is just to keep up what your dad has been doing. How fucking boring is that?
I
Anyway,
agree.
yeah, I think, yeah, if I'd have to predict the future, I think there would be technology to fix democracy. And then I think we're going to max out democracy and eventually capitalism itself in 100 to 200 years if AGI becomes a thing. I am a strong believer in UBI. What's your take on UBI itself?
Absolutely. I think we need to take care of everybody. It's not fair that some people advance while others are left behind. Humans are tribal. We've evolved many things, states of being and reactions and etc. that helped us survive. But none of those things are helping us thrive in today's world. If you've got enough to eat, you don't need to store fat, right? And you've heard that saying, if what you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if what you have is an iPhone, everything looks like something worth taking a photo of or posting about or communicating about. But really, what we all have is a very sophisticated brain. And if all we have is a mind, then the challenge is that everything is worth worrying about, caring about, thinking about. And all humans, are trapped in worrying about the future and reliving the pain of the past. That is the state of being in our human minds, which has kept us alive historically, but it's not going to help us thrive for the future. And that's why meditation can be so powerful, because it teaches you that you are not your mind and allows you to get some distance from that state of being. So yes, I think we shouldn't leave anybody behind. And I think universal basic income is one way to do that, as long as people can also be empowered to do meaningful things with their minds, with their lives, and just have enough to eat is not enough to be a human.
What are the limits of competition? I consider myself to be pretty self-made, although I did have a privileged background. I mean, I stayed alive up until like 18. My mom took care of me when I was a couple months old and so forth. I mean, that seems quote unquote fair to me. At what point should we help someone, favor competition, or favor help? Because the downside of that also is to make someone lazy and addicted to your help. What is your stance on that?
Yes, well, I don't think it's for us to decide how anyone else should live their lives. And what you might consider lazy, I might consider restful contemplation, for example. So that's very subjective. And when I say I think we should take care of everybody, I mean everyone's universal basic needs should be met, and their universal human rights should be respected. What they choose to do with their lives is up to them, and it's not for us to judge. Everyone has the right to their own opinion, but I don't think we have the right to leave people behind based on what we think they're doing with their lives and the validity of that.
Yeah, it's the famous question, as well as yeah, free will, like what's the free will? Because my next question was, as a technologist, I do picture an AI that would coach people and try to bring them to their full potential, if that's what we agree as a society. Because even you and I mean, they have parents, right? And parents impose their thoughts and opinions all the time on their children. Is that fair? So I guess it would be like some sort of AI that would take a percentage of opinion of a bunch of people, including their parents, their community, and the world, and coach them to, I guess, happiness and giving back to society. What do you think about that?
The role of parents are vitally important, as is the role of teachers and mentors, for sure. Teachers should be the highest paid profession on planet Earth, not the lowest paid. They're teaching the next generation of humans.
Yeah, and the educational system doesn't have meditation class, entrepreneurship class, how to deal with setbacks class, mindset class. That's why I want to start my own school, and the tuition will be 100K per student per year. So let's see how that goes. Thank you so much, Salvador, for the great convo today. Where can people find out more about you?
Absolutely, Charles. Thank you so much. On my LinkedIn profile, Salvador Klein, you can click on visit my blog. You can go to Substack and search for Three Strikes Theory. You can just go to Google or any search engine and search for Three Strikes Theory, Salvador Klein, and you'll find it. It's free, and it's relevant for anyone in any business at any stage, anywhere in the world. And I welcome feedback.